My guest today is Avery Toomes, and what I've quickly learned about Avery is that she doesn't hold back any of her words. She writes the stories that others are afraid to tell. She's a Texas-based poet and playwright that transforms personal experiences into powerful art that amplifies women's voices. Her play, Your Power, sold out its New York City debut and later ran in Philadelphia, confronting violence against women through an unflinching lens. The production dismantled silence and sparked critical discourse around the realities of women's lives. A Pratt Institute graduate, Avery works across writing, painting, and multimedia to create art that cuts deep and heals clean. She serves as assistant editor at Tribeza magazine and recently became a best-selling author in the multi-author book Empathy Impact, where she writes about her journey being diagnosed with acromegaly. Through her Substack essays, she shares the kind of raw honesty that helps women feel less alone. Her work appeared in Chrome magazine, The Prattler, and Alston Women magazine. As a member of Zonta Club of Alston, she believes storytelling creates pathways for others to follow. Avery, I'm excited to have you here. Welcome to Talking Acromegaly with Tony.
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today.
Avery, the pleasure is all mine. I'm excited to have you here. So let's get right into it. So when you first realized something wasn't quite right with your health, that
hmm
actually started your journey with acromegaly, can you go into detail and tell us a little bit about that?
Of course. So it was around um, summer of 2021 that I had the first noticeable symptom that I knew something wasn't right. Before that, now in retrospect, I know that I must have already had acromegaly for a few years before that. But, it was one summer day in 2021, and I was about to be a senior at Pratt Institute and, complete my final year of volleyball there. So I was training, I was in the best shape of my life, I was eating very healthy, and I just woke up one day and my jaw was on fire. It felt like I had ate something wrong or laughed really, really hard the day before. And I remember thinking that it was weird, but maybe I was stressed. But I remember also thinking it was strange because I wasn't stressed at this point in my life. I was very happy to be back in New York after COVID. And I was very excited to start my senior year at Pratt. So it didn't really add up. And then from that day until I found out that I had acromegaly and had surgery a few days later, I was in constant, horrible, debilitating jaw pain. So it really stemmed from a jaw pain, mostly on the right side of my jaw. And that was the main symptom that really led me to figuring out what was wrong with me.
You talk about your surgery. Let's touch base
Mm,
on that a little bit.
yeah.
How was your recovery? How long were you in surgery? Can you give me a little detail about how that went?
Yes. So, my surgery was I can't remember that the exact date. It was 3 or 4 days, after figuring out that I had acromegaly. I was told that it was a macroadenoma, and I was able to thankfully go to Memorial Hermann, and have surgery, with Dr. Nitin Tandon, quite quickly. I They told me before about CSF leak, which is your cerebral spinal fluid, and that being something that can happen with transsphenoidal brain surgeries. Which, if you don't know, that's when they go through your nose. So, just a little side thing is, of course, when I found out I had acromegaly and needed brain surgery, my 24-year-old self said, "Oh my God, are you going to have to shave my head?" That was the first thing that I said. But thankfully, they go through your nose. Um, and unfortunately, I did end up having a CSF leak. So I was in the ICU for about 7 days. But I will say it was I was so relieved when I woke up because all of my pain in my jaw was gone. So even though I was anxious about having to stay in the ICU. My main focus was it was the first time in 3 years that I could really think because so much pressure had left my head and my jaw. Um, I did have 2 quite scary hiccups in the ICU, which, I don't think is anybody's fault in any way. It just honestly just freak accidents. I had my A line, like, accidentally shot out of my arm, which was very scary. I still don't know how that happened, but there was a lot of blood. The very scary thing was, when you have a CSF leak, they have a port that comes out of your back, and every few hours every hour, they come in and drain a little bit. And I had asked my nurse, who at this point we were best friends, and I loved her. She was great. But I asked her, I said, "Hey, what would happen if this, like, tube that's draining the CSF fluid ever broke?" And she said, "Oh, well, your brain would hemorrhage because all of the CSF fluid would come out of your brain. Your brain would hemorrhage and you would die immediately." And I was like, "Okay." And obviously that wasn't a great thing to hear, but I was curious. And then I stood up the moment she left and felt wet all down my back. And I turned around and it had snapped in half. I was allowed to get up by myself. I wanna note they said that at that point, I was allowed to go to the bathroom by myself. I wasn't breaking a rule, but, that my heart sank. My partner at the time was there with me, and he was the only person there with me, so he ran out and got that nurse. Thank God she had been a nurse that had a lot of experience, like, on the field. I know that she had been like, a wartime nurse, so she was able to tie it in a knot. She made my, partner at the time grab a tin can and pour alcohol in it, and she stuck it in there so there was no infection. Um, Again, this is kind of different than most people's this was genuinely just a freak accident, but it was something very notable that happened, and it was quite notable for my journey with acromegaly because I think you go through so many emotions through the time it takes to get diagnosed, having a brain surgery. There's so much that goes into that, and I will say that when I was on that bed at 24 years old, and I definitely thought, "Oh my god, like, I'm gonna die," and I was aware of it. I wasn't under anesthesia, so I had to sit there thinking, "These are my last moments, I'm gonna die." Um, that forever changed my life, changed every perspective I have on just about everything, and also changed my healing journey with acromegaly. Um, I think getting close to death, and I mean, even just going into brain surgery, I think a lot of people without the freak accident who have acromegaly could relate, is that the closer that you get to death or understand your mortality, the very easily you understand what really matters in life, what you should care about, what you can let go of. Um, and coming out of that experience, I was a completely changed woman.
You talked about one of the first things you thought about was, "Oh, I hope they don't have to shave my head."
Yeah.
My first thought was when I was told that I needed brain surgery, quote unquote, all I knew or all I thought brain surgery was a craniotomy. And I didn't want to
Mhm,
get my head sawed into. I didn't know
mhm.
that the procedure would be through my nose, and I avoided it for a couple months. I was
But
totally
they didn't tell you.
I didn't talk about it in much detail once I got diagnosed from my primary care physician. He then
Oh,
told me that I would need brain surgery and I needed to get in touch with a neurosurgeon. And I kind of put that part off for a little while because I didn't know what surgery looked like. And in my mind, I had no plans on getting a craniotomy. I was like, I don't
mhm.
want any parts of that. I'm not doing this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go eat healthy. I'm going to work out and I'm going to make this tumor go away. That's what I thought in my mind. However, we both know now that that isn't the case. Right.
Mm.
And so I did go through the procedure and it worked out in my favor. Luckily for me, I didn't have any CFS leaks or any problems at all. Mine went very smoothly and I'm thankful for that. The fact
I'm
that
so happy to
you
hear that.
I appreciate it. We all have different journey and the way things work for us. But I'm happy, mine went the way that it did. So let
Mm,
me ask you this. So at currently 26 years old and being
yes.
diagnosed so young, how did acromegaly, kind of change the way, as a, attractive young woman, change your outlook on your future and even yourself?
Yeah. So the first thing that I'll say is, um, I think being young and at the time when I was being diagnosed being very physically fit and in my early 20s was a disservice to me because it ended up being a disservice because every time I went to a doctor, those were the reasons that I was being dismissed. I was being told that I looked fine, that just I just was probably, like, hormonal, which is hilarious because it is a hormonal disease. I was told to take an Advil, which at that point, I took 4 Advils. I don't know if I've ever said this on a podcast. I took 4 Advils every 4 hours for almost 3 years, and I now have checked my, like, liver and my kidney and everything. Thank God it's fine. I don't know how, but I was also drinking on that. I was in so much pain, and, I mean, so when people told me to take an Advil, I would stare at them and be like, "Yeah, the Advil's not working." But, being young at the time was a disservice because it prolonged me getting the care that I needed. Unfortunately, I think also being a woman is part of it, and I think that, um, a lot of the times I felt very dismissed because I was a young woman, um, and I think the it kind of ended up being a good thing once I found out what was wrong with me. Doctors kept saying, "Well, you're so young, you're gonna be able to bounce back." Um, and that felt good at the time, but now at 26, the way that I feel about it is, there's a lot of challenges that I have to experience that, most people with acromegaly get it in their 40s and 50s. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that is what that's what I've researched. Um, one big thing with having a hormonal disease is acromegaly, can really affect infertility. It can affect a lot of things. Um, I personally have never wanted kids, but I think I was quite stunned when I realized that the possibility of having them were quite far. I think having the choice and having the option was something that was always there, right? So that was definitely shell shocking, and that's a part of having acromegaly as a young woman that maybe isn't talked about as much, and just because there's so much to talk about with acromegaly, to be honest. Another thing with being young woman with acromegaly is um, culturally, I mean, young women are we're unfortunately taught that the way that we look, is a social currency of sorts, and I think that, the physical changes of acromegaly were very, very difficult for me to come to terms with. They also happen so gradually that, you don't notice until you have a quite swollen and deformed face, and it's hard for me when I explain this to people now, they don't know what I'm talking about because my face now isn't as swollen. And I try to explain it, well, no, when I was sick, I was very, very swollen. I didn't look how I look now, but even now, I don't look how I was born. And there's something to be said for that dysphoria of looking in the mirror. And every few months, there's a different person looking at you in the mirror. Um, but I think that there's a specific challenge for young women with acromegaly because it really does deform your face, and when you look it's even, like, in the messaging, like, whenever you look up famous people with acromegaly, if you look up famous men with acromegaly, you have Andre the Giant. We all love Andre the Giant, right? I love Andre the Giant. Princess Bride is one of my favorite movies, and he was this gentle giant, and everybody adored him, and I'm happy because I think that his personality and talent deserve that. But then, if you look up the most famous woman with acromegaly, her name is Mary Ann Bevan, and she was famous for touring the circus as the ugliest woman in the world. Women aren't allowed that same grace. I mean, she could have been a giant with the same wonderful personality and acting skills, but she was a nurse who was fired because she was deformed and had to tour the sideshow, the freak show, as the ugliest woman in the world to feed her children. So I think that there is something to be said for how specifically young women have to handle those physical changes walking through the world. And a lot of them are very masculine changes, right? It's growth hormone, so everything grows. Your voice gets deeper. Um, and I think that uh, that is something that the other one I've talked to who got it around the same age that I did, that we all have a very unique and specific struggle with this disease. And I'm sure, I mean, that you can relate, everyone with acromegaly can relate in their own ways. I think that it's just feels a little heightened to be a girl in your early 20s and to have this happen.
Yes, yes. And in our previous conversation, you talked about some of the things that you've gone through. In particular,
Hmm.
you just mentioned your voice has gotten deeper.
Yes.
Let's touch base on something we talked about where you mentioned that someone on the street approached you in a way that
Mhm.
was pretty negative. If you know what I'm
Yes,
talking about, could you get in a detail with that?
of course, yes. Yes, this is something that, that I haven't talked about a lot openly yet, and I feel very passionate about speaking about it because I think it speaks to empathy and a lot of things that we'll get into later. I have already for reference, I'm a very tall woman. Uh, Before acromegaly, I'm 5'9.5", which is tall, I think. And I had big hands and feet, and I kind of already had like larger a larger physicality. And then when became diagnosed, or not diagnosed, sorry, when I became sick with acromegaly and I became very, very swollen and my voice changed, all of these, like I said, were very masculine changes. So my voice became very deep and my brow bone pushed forward, my jaw became a lot bigger. And I was approached by somebody. Actually, it wasn't on the street, it was at a restaurant. This was the first time. There was more than once, to be honest. I was at a restaurant, I was in a dress, I had my makeup done, I have very long hair, so it's quite obvious that, um, the gender that I was kind of trying to present as, regardless of anything. I walk up to the counter and I order my food, and the guy working at the counter just said, "Okay, sir." And I remember it was me and my mom. And so I was like, there wasn't a man with us. And I was like, very confused. I was literally looking around and I was like, because mind you, 2 years before this, I'm in New York. And this was, I lived, this had never happened to me before being a cis woman. So I was very, very confused. And I remember being like, oh, I'm sorry. No, like I'm a woman. I go by she, her. And I remember he just started laughing and he was just like, "Okay, whatever, sir." And I remember being, like, very confused and very upset, obviously, but confused because at that point, I still did not realize how much my features had changed. And then after that, when it kept happening, it happened a few more times. Fortunately, living in Texas, I wasn't surrounded by people who were the most open minded, is the way that I'll put it. And the times that I was approached, it was typically in a very negative way of somebody assuming that I was transgender, asking me if I was born a woman. And they weren't asking in a nice way, they were asking because they wanted to be very hateful. And at first, it really rocked me. I think I felt hurt because it was confirming that I knew I looked different, but I didn't know why, and I felt really sick. Um, and then eventually, I think, one, I was sick enough that, like, things stopped. I stopped caring about a lot of things because I just was in too much pain. But at the end, when it started happening, I think I started responding with, "And so what if I am?" And I'm really happy that I got to that point because, um as somebody who went through gender dysphoria with acromegaly, right? I'm realizing that now I'm walking through the world being perceived as something different than I'm wanting to be called, which is the same struggle that a transgender gender woman would actually go through. Um, it just gets to a point where I think that I realized I was in so much pain, and whenever those comments would come up, I would just be like, "What's your point? And so what if I am?" But before that, it was confirming that I was physically changing. So those 2 things were happening at the same time, which was quite strange. And again, being born a cis woman, this wasn't something that I thought would ever happen to me. And it definitely confused me and shocked me at the time. I will say I already have always been somebody who's been supportive of anybody who's transgender, but, it gave me, of course, a lived experience that, it opened me up even more to massive empathy for what anybody who is trans or not trans who experiences gender dysphoria is going through. Because, um, yeah, like I am a cis woman, but okay, I you can get a disease that can change the way that you look and change the way that you sound, and it can reflect differently on the outside. And I think this speaks to again empathy. Whenever you meet someone, lead with empathy. Do not lead with judgment. And I'm happy now. The last time this happened to me was actually recently, the way that I look right now. Um, and I had this. I'm very happy to say that I'm at the place now where I feel confident enough where I can just very confidently look at a person and just say, "So what if I am? You have a problem with
Right.
that? Yeah."
I don't understand at this point in your life
Mhm.
why you are even being approached like that. I mean, you obviously, and from my point of view anyway, you're a very
Yeah.
attractive woman. I don't see any
Thank
manly
you.
features. Unfortunately,
Thank you.
I've had conversations with other women with acromegaly who have gotten the same response from time to time,
Yeah.
especially over the telephone. It's
Oh,
unfortunate
100%.
and very unfortunate, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that, especially being uh, a younger woman at 24, 25, 26 years old. This is something
Mhm.
that you definitely shouldn't have to deal with, and it's unfortunate that we've got people out there who think that they can talk to people in such a way. Yeah, that's
I know,
pretty,
and yeah. I feel, I feel thank you for saying that, and, it definitely was something that was hard, and I think shock is the best way I can put it because I was unaware at the time, right, that I had acromegaly, and I was unaware at the time how much my face had changed, so it just didn't quite make sense to me, but of course, I knew I looked a little different, so I think that, um, it was shocking, but you're right, nobody should have to go through that, and it is something that disabled women in general have gone through for different things. I've heard other women who even don't have acromegaly have gone through this. I've also heard, I mean, this, to be completely honest, like, this is just people who are unfortunately hateful, and when you put a woman into a specific box, uh, it makes it so things like this are possible, and when you lead with hatred, that's where that's what embodies people to approach other human beings with that type of, narrative and hatred in their heart, and, I think I've unfortunately just seen it time and time and again, especially in recent years, things like this where people are questioning people's what they were born as, and for anybody who feels that way, my advice to you would be, um, and I say this with peace and love, uh,
yes,
you don't have enough hobbies. You don't have enough hobbies, and you don't have a good enough job if you if you're worrying about what other people are doing like that.
I
Um,
get it.
lead with empathy. Lead with empathy. Lead with kindness. You do not need to be worried about other people walking down the street like that. I promise you, there's a hobby out there with your name on it, um, and you have way too much free time if you are walking around wondering how people were born. Especially, I was ordering food. There was no, and it's unfortunate. And I do want to say that like it's unfortunate for people with women with acromegaly. It's unfortunate in general. Um, and nobody should have to experience a hatred or a violence of any kind like that.
Right, right. Let me ask you this. You spent some time as an athlete and a model. So you dealt with behavior from people thinking that you were of a different gender. Being
Mm.
kind of around the modeling industry, How did
Mm,
your acromegaly change the way you were treated in that particular field?
yes. So, well, the thing with the timeline here is that I the comments where I started being asked if I was born a woman started whenever I moved to Texas. So this would be after I had already kind of exited both of those worlds.
Okay.
But I didn't receive any of that then. And the modeling I was doing was very freelance. Um, and I was also an athlete at Pratt for volleyball. All of these things, it was interesting because both of those things kind of tracked my body in different ways. And now give me a reference for maybe when I did start getting sick because I was on and off modeling, um, kind of freelance here and there. I do have like a physical, like I have a catalog basically of my face changing slowly over time, which is quite interesting to look at. Um, and for volleyball, athletics wise, I can now see when I was doing all the right things by eating healthy, running, working out, and nothing was getting better. My pain was getting worse. So it gives me a kind of reference. But what I will say is, um, I stopped deciding I would ever do any type of modeling ever again when I got sick. When I landed in Texas and I became um, I think my health really plummeted the month that I moved to Austin. Um, I I tried to work out and I couldn't, so my identity as a, athlete flew out the window. I just now am at 26 finally getting back to working out, and I had spent my entire life working out every single day of my life. It was a huge part of my identity, and so that was completely stolen. And the other thing was I never allowed people to take pictures of me. So I went from modeling to hard opposite. There's it's when I was about 23 to 24, really that last year. And that's when I was getting those comments. That's when I was feeling physically also my worst. I hated taking photos. I never wanted anyone to take my photo. So there was a really hard shift, and it didn't come quite within the industry because it just so happened that I moved to Austin and um, but I didn't seek out any other freelance modeling gigs. I wouldn't even let someone take a photo with me if they were my friend. So it was quite severe how much I hated the person in the mirror when I was quite deformed and quite sick. And it went beyond just how I felt about my physical face. I also was unfortunately not able to hold down a job right after college. And I was such a capable and smart person before that and that, you know, failure to launch, right? That's right when you're supposed to fly off and be an adult and do all the things. It was horrible timing. So I was looking my worst, feeling my worst, and failing at absolutely everything. And the way I can explain it best to people was um, I had no measurement of success at that point in my life. I had no successful relationships. I had a cat. That was my most, I still have him, my most successful relationship. I didn't have a great relationship with family. I didn't have a job that fulfilled me, and I couldn't hold down one because I was so sick I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't work out. Everything I felt like everything was failing and I internalized so much of it. So whenever I was looking in the mirror, yes, of course, it was that my physical face had changed so much, but also um, I hated everything about me in general. So it was quite hard to come out of that. And I am proud to say now that I have done my first photo shoot since being sick for the promotion of, and we'll get to it later, I'm sure, but the promotion of my book and that was deeply empowering. And it was also super unsettling to be in front of a camera again. And I think it's one of those
Right.
things that you just have to, anytime you're practicing self empathy, it feels unnatural at first if you're used to telling yourself that you don't like yourself. So in front of the camera, I'm still feeling like the girl a year, 2 years almost now, 2 years ago that I hated in the mirror. When the camera goes up, that's who I feel that I still am. But then you have to catch yourself, and it's kind of a constant cycle of reminding yourself that uh, you should be. True self empathy means that even if I ever went back to being her, if my acromegaly got bad again and I became physically deformed even more again, that I would never look at myself with that hatred again.
That's good to hear. We could
Mm.
probably go on for hours
Yeah.
talking about the fact of that you didn't want to take pictures at one point. I didn't want to take
Mhm.
pictures at one point. There are so
Yeah.
many people that look in the mirror and they aren't happy with the person that they see. That could be traumatizing for some,
Yeah.
and you get to the point where you don't want to look in the mirror.
No.
I was talking to someone recently who mentioned that they would brush their teeth and wouldn't look in the mirror. They would wash their face and wouldn't look in
That's
the
what I would do.
mirror. You did the
Yeah.
same thing, huh?
I not only did that, Tony, I turned the lights off. I wouldn't turn them on.
You would go to the bathroom and be in the
Mhm.
dark.
So so upset with how I looked.
Yeah.
If I'm being completely honest with you, and I think, of course, when am I anything but honest, guys? That's kind of my thing. But I I to be completely honest with you with how bad it was, and I think it's important to always kind of highlight, like, show how, like, the real truth of, like, how bad it can get whenever you feel this way about yourself. No matter, like, how, uncomfortable it can be to be this vulnerable. The truth of
Yes.
it is that, yes, I would go into the bathroom, I wouldn't turn on the lights to wash my face or brush my teeth. It was a great day if I could get myself to shower because I was so ashamed of how my body had changed as a not athlete anymore. I the idea of first it was I didn't wanna see my naked body in the mirror. I don't wanna see my face, but, oh my gosh, my body too. No. And then it got to the point that I couldn't even be alone with myself unclothed in the shower with no mirror. That I was so disgusted with myself at the time that I mean, I was not showering often. I wasn't brushing my teeth often. It got to the point that going in the bathroom was not something that I did often. If I did, um, at the very end of it when I was at its worst with how I felt, um, I would want to there was times that I would put, like, if I could put a blanket above or a towel above the mirror or and still have the lights off. I mean, it was quite severe, the level of self-hatred that I had for myself during that time, and I know that, like, everybody with acromegaly that I've talked to has gone through this at some point. I'm sure that you
Yes.
have a similar experience, and it's quite devastating, and I think, it breaks my heart to hear other people's experiences with it as well, because I know what that feels like, and, to get to that point, it's a very low point, and I write about it in my book, like, what when you get to that point of true, genuine self-hatred of everything about yourself, um, it's it can feel quite hopeless.
Well, let me ask you this. What would you say to someone struggling with the physical changes caused by acromegaly who's having a hard time dealing with it?
I would say and so, like, yes, and that would be in my journey, so for the most part, when I was very, very small and I didn't know what was wrong with me, and for a lot of people that is the case, and then you have surgery, and after surgery, your face will kind of become unswollen, but as they will tell you the bony changes will stay and certain things will, you know, what I would say to somebody who has acromegaly that's going through that right now, is that you have just survived brain surgery. You have survived um, going through having a rare disease, something that most people in their life never will. And there's a certain strength and power that you should be very proud of. And the other thing I would say is that, I mean, this is the point that I kind of had to get to myself, and it genuinely takes a lot of time. But uh, I think that you get to a certain point when you realize the gravity of that you have survived brain surgery. You realize that the way that you look is it's the least interesting thing about you. And I say that for everyone, with or without acromegaly. The way that you look is the most like least interesting thing about you. Like, what do you do for your community? What do you do to spread empathy in the world? Do you have like an artistic practice? What makes you excited? Because I promise you, what makes you excited inside is not what like, the way that you look. I mean, maybe somebody who really loves themselves is like, "I really love the way I look, that's great," but I'm sure if you really ask them, "Okay, what else makes you excited?" They have something else that's gonna be the answer. Um, like, it's truthfully and learned this in a very severe way of when I almost died in the ICU. That was one of the lessons that I learned was oh my God, that doesn't matter. Like, none of that matters. Nothing, like, why was that such a focus? And to be completely real, healing is never linear, right? So there was, after surgery, there was days that I felt like that. And there are days, even now, that I'll look back and I'll be like, oh, I don't like that picture of me. Oh, I don't like the way that I look. I wish they caught it sooner so I didn't look this way. I wish that they had caught it sooner so I looked like I had the face that I was born with. It's a grief, like, it's losing an identity. And I wrote so much about that. I've wrote poems about that, about what it's like to have to lay yourself to rest in a way, to bury the life that you could have lived if you had never had the disease and if you had a different face. Truthfully, I mean, my advice is acknowledging what you've been through, and also something, a practical, actionable step that I will say that I did that helps me to this day with, any negative thoughts that I have, is being very aware of my thoughts. Whenever these thoughts come in, I have to stop myself, remind myself to have empathy for myself, and that, um, I'm a strong person who went through brain surgery, and the way that I look doesn't quite matter in the grand scheme of things. And the other thing I've done is I took a little, this is a great actionable step for people. I took a picture of me as a kid and I have it taped to my mirror in my bathroom. So now when I go on there and I flip on the light and it's early in the morning and I'm groggy and I'm looking at things and I see my face with no makeup, and I'm always now going to look a bit more masculine. Oh well. Like, I look at the little girl in the mirror and I think, you know what? Like, she would be so impressed that I could get through something like this. And I would never speak to her the way that I'm speaking, the way the thoughts that I automatically have are speaking to me. Um, and that's been super helpful, honestly. And I mean, that's an actionable step. But yeah, I mean, the grand scheme of things is like, think about what you've already accomplished. And my main thing now, whenever I feel, I was told by one doctor, oh, well, you could get facial feminization surgery if you wanted. If you felt like you wanted to, you could get facial feminization surgery, and you could also get voice therapy. And now I flipped back and forth on if I wanted to do it. And the way that I feel now is that I truthfully feel that this face is the face that, like, how unique. My face has survived, like, a rare disease. This is like, this face is a memorialization of, like, how tough I am. I didn't give up on myself. And, like, yes, I hated myself, but I got to a very, very dark place where I wanted to give up on myself. And I write about that in the book, about what my darkest night was before I found out about what happened or what was wrong with me. And this face is a testament that I'm alive. And I don't know. I find it. I find there's a certain beauty in that, and so that's another thing that I remind myself whenever I have those negative thoughts is that this is the face that survived, and how
That's
beautiful is that? And I hope that you feel the same way about your face, and you're quite handsome with your red as well. It's stunning.
it's Valentine's Day. I'm doing my part as far as being Cupid for the day. Let's talk
I love
about
it.
let's talk about, you talked about your thoughts and you mentioned a little bit about surgery. Let's talk about something that we found out we had in common, and that's that my thoughts sometimes get jumbled. I have what
Mm,
we call acro
yes.
fog, or brain fog,
Yeah.
or short-term memory loss, for those who may not exactly know what I'm talking about.
Mm.
Explain your experience with it.
Yeah, I think this kind of speaks to everything that we've talked about. And it was a sentiment. I know I told you this, that whenever I was kind of in this grieving process, and um, of after I was diagnosed, after surgery, you kind of go through an insane mental process where you realize everything you went through had a reason, and then you have an answer for all of your pain. So you're in this kind of like weird state right after surgery. And I've talked to other people who have acromegaly, and they said that they've agreed. And during that state, you also are experiencing the effects of having brain surgery. For me, when I first came out of brain surgery, I was calling everybody the wrong name. And it was kind of like a joke at first. And I thought that it would go away. And to this day, I still have a lot of brain fog moments. And it was really, really challenging in that journey of having self-empathy and forgiveness for myself, like, in this after post surgery. because I've always been so smart. I've been very quick-witted my whole life, and not being able to recall the name of something that I know, and you know what it is, but you can't bring it from the back of your mind to the front of your mind. It's deeply frustrating, and something that I told you was I was so frustrated with this, and this is what say when I mean um, healing is not linear because I, of course, was on this healing journey. I was feeling great about myself, but this really took me back a few steps. And I went back into feeling really bad about myself with my brain fog. And I convinced myself um, that I needed to see a neuropsychologist because, and I quote verbatim myself on the phone to my friend, I said, well, I'm just so stupid that I have brain damage. And I was being very, very cruel to myself. I went to a neuropsychologist. I had a 5-hour test with her. She called me and told me that with acromegaly, you do have short-term memory loss from extended periods of growth hormone. That my scans and the tests did not show that I had anything significant beyond short-term memory loss and that it should go away. But what she highlighted was quite interesting. She said that one, I had ADHD, need to get medicated. No shock there. But she said that I was doing quite well on the test, very well actually on this cognitive test, and I was verbally saying over and over again to the person who was testing me that I was stupid and that I had brain damage. And that was when she recommended me more therapy, which, yeah, I laugh in these moments. Obviously, at the time it wasn't quite funny, but I can laugh now because, obviously, thank God. But I think it speaks to like that exact thing that I keep bringing up is that self empathy because yes, I have short-term memory loss and problems, that affect me from surgery. Sometimes I'll get lost in a sentence. Sometimes I'll know somebody's name and I can't remember it. Sometimes there's an object in front of me and I know exactly what that thing is, but it's in the back of my head and I can't get it to the front. Um, and it was that old version of me that was very, very hateful to myself that made it a million times worse than what it actually was and convinced me that again, it was those old thoughts that I was incapable, that I wasn't worthy, that I wasn't smart. And none of that is true. I literally had to go though to a doctor and do a 5-hour test to figure that out. It's deeply frustrating to experience the after effects of acromegaly because I think after brain surgery, you assume that life will get better and it will, but you assume that you're kind of completely out of the woods. And for most people with acromegaly, that's not the case. I do, I still have a brain tumor, and I think I often don't phrase it that way, um, but I do. They weren't able to get the full brain tumor out of my brain. I have some wrapped around my carotid artery and my cavernous sinus. That's scary. Half of my face could become paralyzed because it's sitting on a nerve that controls half of the function of the muscles in one side of my face. I had to get radiation, and that has some scary side effects that could happen in the next few years. And I think, this memory loss is one of the many things where it's like, gosh, I did it. I did the brain surgery. I did the radiation. I did all the things. I take the shot once a month. I do all the I eat a ketogenic diet. Like, I mean, I do what the doctors tell me to do. And so I think now, when we have those leftover remnants of the things that we've been through, one of which is, of course, the memory issues, and any type of cognitive function, it's really frustrating, and it's even more frustrating when you know that you used to be smarter, and it's the same thing with what I said, I used to be an athlete, so now when I go to work out and I can barely run a mile, I know 5 or not 5, I know 3 years ago, I was running 8-minute miles, no problem. It's the same thing with when I took a picture and I felt terrible about it, and I knew years before this I was freelance modeling and felt like a very beautiful young woman. Um, and whenever I was in that state of kind of going through all of these emotions, I had this very cyclical thought in my head. And it was speaking to everything that we're talking about now, which was to have something and then to lose it. And that thought just kept coming. And I wrote it down a bunch of times to kind of get it out of my head. And it was, cognitive function, athleticism, whatever. You lose a lot to this disease. And it sucks that after brain surgery, you're usually, unless you are well, I don't wanna say because 'cause I'm not exactly sure, but for a lot of people, you're not out of the woods yet. So, that is something that was quite challenging for me, was also that cognitive bit, and I know that you can relate to that as well.
That's quite true. We're not out of the woods yet after the brain surgery. And I was one as well who thought that I was. I
Mhm.
was dead set on not doing anything else after I had that brain surgery, and I didn't for quite a while. I'm
Yeah.
thankful that I finally mentally got things together to whereas I focused more on my health and I paid
Mm.
attention to what I needed to do, and I actually started doing what my doctor told me to do. And I can go on for a long time about what I didn't do in the beginning, but this is about you today. Let's get into your book here. You talked a lot about empathy,
Yes.
and you talk a lot about that in your book, which
Mhm.
is an excellent read. Recommend that you pick up Avery's book along with her co-authors. Avery, can you tell us a little bit about your book and what you're doing moving forward?
Yes. Um So Empathy Impact is a anthology written by 15 different women on the topic of radical empathy and how that can change lives in a community. So I was very, very blessed when Michelle Savage, the editor in chief at Sulik Press Books, invited me to be in this book and write my story of empathy with my diagnosis. And it was interesting because whenever I thought I've been a writer my whole life, and whenever I thought about um, whenever I thought about how I was gonna write this story, because I knew I was gonna write it, it was just how. I didn't think empathy was gonna be the main point. And it whenever I started writing it from that lens of empathy, it was also a whole other healing journey for me because I was well aware of how much I had a lack of empathy for myself and how much people around me unfortunately also had a lack of empathy. Um, before I get into my story, I just want to say the other stories are absolutely wonderful and something that I feel very, very passionate about with Sulit Press is that 100% of all the proceeds for this book all of them go to support their nonprofit partner, Louder Than Silence, which is a nonprofit that helps survivors of sexual violence, all at no cost to them. So it's a great read for a great cause. And now I can go into kind of what exactly I wrote about. And I write about my story, but I did it in a way that I didn't think I was going to originally. Um, and it was because I had to keep it around that central theme of empathy. And I thought, okay, well, how did empathy show up when I was getting diagnosed with acromegaly? And it was like crickets in my head. I was like, okay. And there was a few things that I could pick up of ways that people showed up for me. But what was the loudest was oh, things were really bad because I had a lack of empathy. And I kind of went down that and thought about like conveying to somebody how much when you have a disease or a chronic illness, especially in like I know acromegaly technically isn't an invisible illness at the end, but it starts off that way, right? Um, and having an illness where people aren't believing you and they aren't believing your lived reality and they're telling you it's psychosomatic, that lack of empathy can leave you to that really dark place where you're in the bathroom in the dark. And a little tidbit is I write about the night, a few nights before I found out what was wrong with me. And I had gotten to the point that I didn't want to be alive anymore. I had lost, I think, oh gosh, like my, like, 5th or 6th job at that point. I had again, no I had no reference or, uh, measurement of success in my life at all. At that point, I had truly failed at everything, and if there's one thing about me, my original personality, kind of before I got sick, I was the most determined, smart, and capable I mean, I was going through a life path that made no sense and nobody could stop me, right? I was gonna be a writer in New York and nobody could stop me, and, um, and like, that all of that was gone. So and it was because at that point, for 3 years, I would go to doctors, they would say, you're probably being dramatic. It's probably in your head. It's probably psychosomatic. And I know that's things that people with acromegaly hear all the time because our Symptoms are so varied, and there's not enough awareness. So I was told that quite a bit. I got 2 surgeries, like surgeries on my nose that for my sinuses that I did not need. I tried every treatment. I tried Botox all through my head. I spent thousands of dollars, went to so many doctors. And I was also very young at this point, and unfortunately, my family, when I would reach out to them, they didn't show up for me. Um, and that was really, really hard. I was left completely alone for a lot of it. And thank God there were a few people, um, and not all of them, just because honestly I was given a like, because it's a multi-author book, there's a very short word count, so there's of course a bigger version of the story, as every other chapter in that book has a bigger version of the story. But there were friends, and thankfully the partner I had at the time, that were there for me. um, but for the most part, the people that I really did feel like I could trust, family and doctors, completely failed me. And it led me to completely internalize all of it, because I wasn't just not being shown up for with family, I was being told that I was lazy, that I was a failure, and that it was all my fault, that my life failing was all on me. Um, that was really hard for me to digest, and I believed it because I mean, in my head, they were right. I mean, look at the proof, look at the evidence. I've been to so many doctors. It must be psychosomatic. I have failed at every job. I must be lazy. I've always been theatrical and artistic, so I must be dramatic. And I did myself the ultimate disservice where I believed what the people around me were saying, who unfortunately didn't have my best interest at heart. And I completely abandoned myself to the point that I wanted to do the ultimate self abandonment that night when I was in my bathroom. And I'm very, very, very happy that, um, honestly, I became too intoxicated and too sick to continue with what I was planning to do. And thank God, because I'm not kidding. Days after, I find out that I have a brain tumor. And the hardest thing that I wrote that was in this book was the scene I write about finding out that I have the tumor. And my mom had finally shown up for me because I had proof. And I showed her the scan, and I was crying, and I was telling her, it's not all my fault. This isn't all my fault. I didn't want my life to be this way. And look, like I'm telling it's real. It's real now. And I remember that the day that I became diagnosed with acromegaly, very ironically, and the day that I found out I had a brain tumor was the best day of my life. I was completely vindicated in how I felt. Finally, I had a measurement also of like, a brain tumor is really severe, but that's the amount of pain that I was in. And that was the pain I was trying to convey for years. And nobody believed me. And I was like, it is that bad. Like, yes, the pain I was in was brain tumor level bad. And so that day, whenever I got that email, saying that I had acromegaly and I had a brain tumor, um, it was the best day of my life. And I write a lot about that empathy, because that moment with my mom, um, that is that moment where I explained to her she didn't show up for me, and how much that lack of empathy really destroyed me as a person for when I was sick. And also, um, that I shouldn't have had to have been, I mean, this is the direct line from the book, but I shouldn't have had to have been dying for you to show up for me. I shouldn't have, it shouldn't have ever have to been that bad. And I would urge the people to read the book to figure out the rest. But it's
Okay,
that
well,
was a
I was
really
about to say
hard,
something about the book in that particular situation with
yeah.
your mom that I'll hold
Yeah.
off on then.
Well, I
Okay.
mean, we can get into it. It's up to you.
Well, I'm thankful that your mom did finally apologize
She
and
did. She
said
did. Yeah.
she in your book you wrote that she finally said that she was sorry after finding out that you had a brain tumor and that you had
Yes.
acromegaly.
And
Think
that
that was
scene, I
important
mean,
to say.
it is, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think that that's something that I actually would love to speak on really quick, is that she did apologize. And the scene was so hard for me to write because, and if you read it, I say it in multiple different types of ways, was that kind of I had this feeling that both could be true. She was sorry. She didn't show up for me in that way. There was things, and I was in that moment I'm not sure that I felt a lot of forgiveness. Um, I felt still very abandoned. And it was these things that two things could be true at once, and that my I felt like I didn't want a relationship with her, and she was also my mother. So it was, and that's biological. The love doesn't go anywhere when it's your mom. The love's always going to be present. And I love my mom. She also didn't show up for me when I called her every day when I was 22 saying, "Please drive 2 hours to come help me, something's wrong with me." When my aunts and uncles and employers reached out to her and said, "Something is wrong with your child." So, like, and there's more to that story that I didn't write out of respect for her as to why we were at that point, but her apology meant a lot to me, and it also didn't change the reality, and both those things can be true at the same time, and there's a forgiveness that, and I talked about this on the panel that I had recently, at my book launch party, where forgiveness, you can forgive people, it's not so black and white, it can kind of be this, like, kind of shifting thing where you can forgive someone for certain aspects of things. And there are other things that maybe it takes longer to forgive, or maybe you don't feel like you can forgive. And I think that what was important there was she was finally showing me that empathy, and there was a part of me that was having empathy for her. How could she? I have a line where I was like, "How could she have known? How could she have known?" Well, then there's the other part of me that says she could have listened and shown up for me, and then we would have found out together. So it's kind of this whole thing where it's very empathy is messy. That's kind of the main point here. Is like empathy is not so like clean and obvious and easy. It's not like always the right thing to do. Empathy can be forgiving something like that. It could be having the empathy for myself to say, I was completely abandoned by in a very specific way, and right now I don't feel like I can forgive. That's having empathy and not abandoning myself and how I feel. It's not black and white. It's not a clean cut thing, and I think that balancing empathy for others and empathy for yourself is also a very challenging thing. And that scene was the most, I mean, genuinely one of the most challenging things I've ever had to write because all of that I had to write in a scene to be true, and it's it's got so many layers, but yeah, it is very important to note, she apologized, and, um, and I think that I was very, very grateful to finally receive those words, and I also felt at the time that I wanted to explain to her, like, the she had no knowledge of how bad I had gotten mentally because I had been so abandoned and lacked the empathy and received her judgment. She had no knowledge that I didn't wanna live anymore. Um, and I think I needed to convey that to her for her apology to fully stick, if that makes sense.
And
Yeah.
you not only got that sense of not feeling as though you were supported, not only from your mom, but your dad as well. So there was times when you mentioned in your book, he said that you were going to the hospital too much. They were building up hospital bills.
Mm.
What's your relationship like now with both your mom and your dad?
Yeah. So, with and I write it in the book, and something to note is that, of course, when you write, so I always try to preface this. When you write nonfiction, you are seeing this story through my lens. This is my point of view of the story. And I think that's always really important to note, not to discount my own story, but I think that that's always to be said with nonfiction. At the same time, the way that I wrote my parents in this book, the scenes and the things that happen between us, I took it upon myself to really, really try. And at that point, it's another act of empathy I had for them. Um, I tried to make it as nuanced and fair to them as possible. I didn't go out to write this book to bash people. I did not go out to write this book to say these people were terrible parents to me, full stop, because that's not the truth. But I did write what actually happened from my point of view. And I especially in that scene with my mom, I tried to give her a lot of grace, in any way that I possibly could. It's been a lot harder for my father, because the, um, compliment or not compliments, the apologies I received never felt authentic, to be completely honest. And he So there's something to be said with what I just said with my mom, right? Two things can be true. My father worked at Memorial Hermann his whole life. My father is the reason that I had the access to get to a neurosurgeon so immediately fast. He knew the neurosurgeon personally because he worked in that hospital his whole life. That's a massive act of empathy. He helped me get brain surgery with an amazing doctor extremely fast. Um, and that is something to know. But at the same time, the verbal abuse that I received when I was very, very sick, um, quite quickly has resumed after. And so that's kind of the thing where it's like having the self empathy is understanding that, again, I shouldn't have to be dying to receive empathy, right? So, um, if I'm healthy now and I'm receiving the same type of verbal abuse that I received earlier, then that's a person that I don't feel that I need to have a relationship with. Um, it's with the both of them, I love my parents, and, it's a very, very difficult thing to not be in contact with them often or really much at all. Um, but I think that a part of my healing journey was understanding, that I had to truly understand how much as I looked back at the past few years, I really understand how much they didn't show up for me. How many times I called them and I was told that it was all my fault. And a lot of that verbal abuse came from my father. And I write in the book, being called a disappointment. The what I put in the book was the nicest version. Like I wrote it in a very nuanced
Wow.
way to try not. I didn't go to bash people. That's what I'm saying. I went to explain my experience. That was a really nice version of all the things that were said to me. Um, and whenever now that I've been in this healing journey, in therapy, I was asked, well, whenever you hear these thoughts that you're not worthy, that you aren't capable, that you like all of these negative thoughts, like whose voice is that? And I realized that it was my father's. It was the person who had been saying these things to me. And to be honest, like me being sick wasn't the first time that he had said mean things to me, of course, right? That's probably like it didn't just show up because I was sick. But
Okay.
it gave him the perfect opportunity to kind of go into it further, over those years when I was sick. And, um, we've had many conversations. I think that, publishing a book on this, um, having a very public thing is quite hard, but, since I was a little girl, everyone knew that I was gonna be a writer, and I always told people, you know, "I'm gonna write about my experiences." I've always been really honest about that, like, if you say something around me and I write about it, I'm a writer. It's I write about my experiences, but I write about the ways in which I've messed up too. I mean, I go to be nuanced, and I try really hard to find that gray area when I can. Um, and now the relationship that I don't really speak to my father at all. I speak to my mom on occasion, um, and I think that I have in this in the name of self-empathy, in the name of not abandoning myself, I cannot allow the people who would continue to not have my best interest at heart, to continue to speak poorly to me, or um, not care about my safety in any way. I wouldn't be able to have those things. Those things couldn't be true. I could not have self-empathy and have those people in my life. So I am very protective of my energy now. I'm very protective of who gets to be around me. I'm very protective of myself, and that comes from loving yourself. Before, when I didn't love myself, in relationships with anyone, family, friends, or romantic relationships, I was just desperate for someone to be around me, and I couldn't believe that somebody would want to be around me when I was sick. I felt like such a burden.
Wow.
And yeah, I just felt lucky if somebody wanted to spend 5 minutes with me. And I also thought that, "Oh, well, I talk too much and I do all these things and I'm sick all the time, and who's gonna wanna deal with that?" And, I was told that I was a burden. So all of that was present, and so now that I do love myself and I'm out of the woods with the self-love part, and I'm coming from that place of protecting myself, I'm always open to revisiting any relationship if somebody comes to me earnestly and patterns change. but, I am somebody where actions mean more than anything, and if actions of abuse don't change, then at the end of the day, I have to make the really unfortunate decision to protect myself and make sure that I'm taking care of myself first. Because if I had listened, just one last note, if I had listened to myself with how bad I knew that I felt when I was sick, if I hadn't abandoned myself, and I try not to even put that on me because I've been taught to abandon myself a million times over. But if I hadn't abandoned myself and I said no, um, like, and I am sick, and and I it wouldn't have been prolonged so long. And you know what? If it hadn't been prolonged so long, it wouldn't have grown big enough to wrap around my carotid artery. I could have been cured. And I think about that often. I think about what the cost of not believing my own self, the cost of not loving myself in those moments, because the people who were supposed to love me more than anyone were telling me that it was all my fault. And doctors also weren't believing me. Um, it almost cost me my life. So I think when I think about that, it does lean me into a more self-protective mode. I'm someone still full of love and empathy for others, and something a part of this is looking from their point of view, looking in their shoes. Um, and I'm more than willing to always do that. But when it's not reciprocated, and I've asked my mom if she put herself in my shoes, and she said that she couldn't because she could never handle experiencing what I went through, that she wasn't willing to because of how bad it was and how bad she knew it was. So, I can only do so much, right? I can only put myself in your shoes.
Right.
If you can't put yourself in mine and we can't see eye to eye, then I'm gonna do what's best for me because let me tell you, it's not gonna happen twice. I'm not gonna self-abandon twice. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So, what do you hope readers take away from the book?
Mm. Yeah. Um, in general, because this book has, again, it has 14 other amazing stories of empathy. A lot of them are about self-empathy. And it's also empathy for other people, but I think they show what I love about this book is they show it in the not cookie cutter way. All of these stories show women's stories of empathy in the messy way that I talk about. Um, and it's not like, oh, and then you love yourself and it's rainbows and sunshine. Like we're talking about very, very real stories here, and how much you have to dig deep to garner that and gain that self empathy. Um, what I would want readers to take away is I think I would really just want readers to take away that if you are leading with judgment over empathy, um, you you're always going to uh, meet people in a way that's going to do them and you a disservice. Um, and how important it is whenever you are met with something challenging to look at something twice and lead from a point of empathy. Think you're I mean, it's natural to have that immediate judgmental thought, but pausing and saying, "Okay, this person isn't being themselves. Okay, this person maybe used to be sober and isn't anymore." Like, that's what I'm talking like, these are, like, very there are some very dark stories in this book where it's, people hit their rock bottoms, and it's those moments when I really, really love this quote, and it's a I think it's James Baldwin who said it, and he said that, when you walk down the street, you can find misery anywhere, and I'm not giving a verbatim quote, but, he says that anyone that you see on the street, is you, is a reflection of you. That's truthfully what I want people to take away from this book, is that that's what empathy is seeing somebody you see the homeless person on the street, that's you. Hey, most people in America are one medical bill away from being that, right? So, like, that person on the homeless street is you. That person who uh, you judged because they fell into alcoholism, that is we all are mirrors of each other, and leading with a point of empathy, um, really, really, really has a massive impact on the world, and on yourself. And the other side of that is internal, which is, the world's gonna tell you over and over again to hate yourself, especially if you're a young woman, but really for anyone, because, It's profitable, to be honest. It's profitable for you to hate yourself. It's how, you know, surgery, plastic surgery, makeup, social media, these things profit off you hating yourself. Um, and certain wellness I mean, there's a million things that profit literally because you are being told that your authentic true form as you are needs to change. Um, the world's going to tell you over and over again why you don't matter and why you should hate yourself and what you need to change. And I would hope that reading these stories would show um, that self empathy is not something that you just should do. It's something you need to do. And for me, not having self empathy almost killed me twice. Once with the brain tumor, and the other one with almost wanting to end my own life. So I would urge people to realize that um, self empathy, it's not a want, it's a need. And it's probably also because of the messaging that we've been brought up with is a deeply challenging thing to do. It's honestly, I think for most people easier to love other people than love yourself. Just from the people I've talked to about this topic, turning that inwards, well, it won't just improve your life, but it's also quite life saving in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's one of the things.
My next question comes from um, just being concerned, being
Mm,
coming from a friendship standpoint. At this point, you've been through a
yeah,
lot,
yeah,
and where are you now currently from a therapy standpoint? Are you in
yeah.
therapy? Is it something that you're doing regularly? Can you elaborate on that and how it's working for you?
Yes. Well, first of all, Tony, thank you for asking. That's very sweet. And I'm actually thrilled to answer this because I think a lot of times when I talk about this, it's a very serious topic and I do get deep, right? I'm honest. I talk about the fact that I had suicidal ideations that night, that I wasn't well because of all the things that I've been through. And it can kind of be quite dark. So I'm very happy to tell you that I thankfully am better than I've ever been. And it's because it truthfully is because there is one thing that I have committed to, in the recent months. Honestly, it's been somewhat recent as I've been on this therapy journey since I got out of surgery. I did start therapy, and something that I honed in on was I am never going to abandon myself again. And what does that look like? And I had no idea what that looked like. I didn't realize how much I also had been abandoning myself, especially when I was so sick. So I'm thrilled to tell you that my therapy journey is amazing. It's been great. I'm working with a wonderful therapist, and I I am very happy to say that you know, one of the things that I did that was therapy was putting that picture of me up there. Um, and thankfully, outside of that night in the bathtub, I am just somebody who has never I'm not somebody who often has suicidal ideations. So that and I think also when I almost died, the thought of not realizing how precious life is, I couldn't ever imagine being back in that place. Knowing that I had a very scary moment where I could have died, I realized how precious life is. So that is another reason that uh, propelled my healing. Um, but I'm doing really well. I really protect myself and my energy. And I'm honest with myself now of what I can and can't handle. I'm patient with myself and I forgive myself. I mean, being patient with myself is probably the hardest part. I'm not really a patient person in general, to be honest. It's not a thing I'm very good at. Um, and being patient with myself when I can't remember something, if I mess up something because I'm having brain fog. If I when I started my physical journey as well of working out and going into physical therapy again, for all the things that were adjusted and shifted because of acromegaly. And you know what? I can't run an 8-minute mile right now. I am lucky if I can finish a mile, but I feel so proud of myself when I just leave the gym. I'm like, I couldn't even like get in the car and drive 2.5 years ago. And I think it just took a bit of time, a lot of therapy, but there was a certain amount of time of it's a grief. There was a grieving process that I really, for a while, was holding on to. old Avery, pre-surgery Avery. And I would tell people, "Oh no, well, you didn't know me before surgery. You didn't know me before I got sick. I was so blank. I was so beautiful. I was so capable." I attached myself to that identity. And I think now the true shift has happened is that I've accepted who I am now. I've accepted this identity. And like now I've also accepted that I'm a person who has a chronic rare disease and what comes with that. So it's led me to be able to be patient with myself. If I can't run a mile fast, if I mess up like in any way with cognitive function. It's a lot of patience for myself. And I'm really proud to say, and I don't think I have said this before, notably on a podcast, but I'm really proud to say that I love myself. And that's huge. I've never really openly been somebody that could say that easily. I really do. I think I'm a great person, and I see my qualities now, and I see that I'm a good friend, and that I'm a good partner, and like that I'm smart and I'm capable. I'm artistic. Like all of these things I know about myself now. But that took a lot of therapy, going through that grieving process, and endless self empathy. And I want to be completely clear, it was not linear. It's so important because so many people I know who I've talked to with acromegaly, they're like, "Well, I was doing well, and then my numbers changed, and I wasn't." To be honest with you right now, like if I went and got, my blood work done in a few months and I was not doing well again, it would be really difficult. I'm sure I would have those thoughts again. It's never the straight and easy path. It's you're always going to have those moments. But I feel the difference is that I trust myself now because I trust myself to believe in myself. I trust myself to get myself out of any type of depression or situation. I trust myself to make the correct medical choices for myself. I'm not looking for anybody else to tell me how to live my life anymore. I'm not looking for parents or doctors or anybody to confirm my reality is real. I know my body, I know myself, um, and that is truthfully why I feel so much better now. I'm very grateful that I'm at this point in my life. I'm honestly shocked. I never thought that I could get here, and I'm so happy that I am.
I'm happy that you're at this point in your life. You seem as though right now you're in a space where you're comfortable with the new you,
Mm,
and the fact that you're loving yourself and giving yourself grace, Avery, is so important. Let me make sure I get everyone a good look of your book here. Let's tell everyone where they can find your book.
yes. You can find my book on Amazon, and we have it in the link as well. You can find it in the link at Sulet Press Books on Instagram. In the link in their bio, you can buy it there, or you can also go to suletpress.com. They have a bookstore tab on their website, and you can get the book there. It'll take you right over to Amazon where you can get it. There's an ebook if you prefer ebooks, and then there's a physical copy. And like I said, 100% of the proceeds go to charity. Everything goes to help other people. So it truthfully is a great read for a great cause.
I was so interested in having you here and hearing your story. I'm thankful for your honesty, your openness, and I'm glad that you were able to we were able to finally make this happen and put it together. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, and thank you for talking acromegaly with Tony. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Tony. I wanna also just highlight, you having this platform for us and creating a space for people with acromegaly to share their stories, is really wonderful. It's gonna spread a lot of awareness, and I'm thrilled to see, everybody else who comes on this podcast and hear their stories. It means the world when somebody has a shared experience of, your particular pain, and it makes people feel less alone, so I can't thank you enough for having me on here and also for doing what you do.
I'll close with this. Avery, this conversation has been very powerful and honest and deeply necessary. Your willingness to tell the stories others are afraid to voice, whether through poetry, theater, visual art, or your own acromegaly journey creates a space for healing, understanding, and real change. You remind me that silence doesn't protect me, but storytelling does. I appreciate that your voice to amplify the lives of women, confront hard truths, and help others feel seen and less alone. Your work doesn't just cut deep, it opened doors for empathy, courage, and connection. I'm grateful that you shared your story with me today. And for the viewers, if you found interest in this episode, drop a comment, share it, like it, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow me on all my social media platforms. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and never stop believing that better days are possible.